Hey everyone, welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're jumping right into something that's going to totally flip how you think about anti-aging and regenerative medicine. We're looking at a pretty revolutionary concept from Dr. Pan. He's a craniofacial surgeon, but he also has this deep background in chemistry, which gives him a totally unique perspective on how our bodies age. Basically, he argues that for decades, modern medicine has been completely obsessed with the seed, injecting new stem cells to fix aging bodies. But what if true anti-aging actually means forgetting the seed for a minute and focusing entirely on the soil? Okay, let's dive into this roadmap and completely deconstruct modern regenerative medicine. We'll start with the true face of aging, look at the blind spots of stem cells, unpack the seed and soil paradox, check out the historical proof of reversing aging, and finally look at purifying our internal environments. So just think about the journey of a pristine cell for a second. The anti-aging industry has literally poured billions into perfecting the cell itself. But Dr. Pan had this stark realization. Adding fresh, perfect cells to your body means absolutely zero if the complex, flowing environment they're entering is toxic, if it's hostile. We desperately need a paradigm shift here. All right, section 1, the true face of aging. Let's shatter a huge myth about growing old. Look at it from a biochemical level. Aging is really just a constant, relentless battle between systemic trauma and cellular repair. I mean, on your ID card, your chronological age only goes in one direction, right? It's totally fixed. But your biological age, that is highly malleable. Your actual bodily function is entirely dictated by which side of this biochemical scale is winning. When damage outpaces your ability to repair, well, you age. But when repair overtakes damage, that's when youth is maintained. Dr. Pan looks at this through the highly practical lens of a surgeon. He points out that, look, we can't rewrite the birth date on your passport, and honestly, that shouldn't even be the goal. The real objective is practical biological maintenance. It's about optimizing your body's machinery so that your physical appearance, and more importantly, your internal functions just stay in a youthful, highly operative state. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the biggest misconceptions out there. We usually think of physical decline as this gradual, steady slope downward once we hit our 30s. But clinically, aging is actually a steep, sudden staircase. Our bodies are incredibly resilient. Our repair mechanisms hold the line. They mask the underlying damage right up until critical thresholds are breached. We actually see the first major biological drop around age 55, and then a second, even steeper drop in our early 60s. But here is where the science gets super exciting. Take a look at this reversibility zone. Post-60, severe illness tends to spike because those systemic repair mechanisms finally just give out. And this is a huge but, if we can successfully reverse the underlying biological aging mechanisms, this exact delta, this specific triangle of lost function, can actually be reclaimed. Navigating these sudden biological drops is literally the key to extending our health span. So why aren't the current therapies working perfectly? That brings us to section 2, blind spots of stem cells. Driven by an aging population, stem cell research has completely exploded over the last 24 years. The science of identifying, isolating, and culturing these cellular seeds is frankly incredible today. We absolutely know how to grow the perfect cell. And yet, outside of really specific procedures like bone marrow transplants, the clinical outcomes for general anti-aging and systemic repair remain highly unpredictable. The promise is massive, for sure, but the real-world results, they're often frustratingly inconsistent. Which brings us right back to our understanding of age. Remember that difference between chronological and biological age? The current stem cell industry kind of acts as if just injecting new cells will magically turn back the chronological clock. But it just doesn't work that way. Biological age is totally dependent on the environment those cells live in. If your underlying biology is broken and inflamed, simply dumping a bunch of new cells into the mix is not going to solve the problem. This clinical diagnostic matrix really shows exactly why. When doctors try an IV delivery, the scattergun approach, it's a physical failure. Cultured stem cells are actually pretty large, and they often get trapped in the tiny 8 micrometer pulmonary capillary bottleneck in the lungs before they ever even reach the target organs. On the flip side, when doctors try local injections directly into a damaged joint or an organ, it's a biological failure. You're putting pristine cells into a toxic, aged microenvironments, and they inevitably just die. Clearly, we need a new approach. And that brings us to the absolute core limitation of modern regenerative medicine. Section 3, the seed and soil paradox. Dr. Pan uses this great analogy of planting a seed in a garden. But let's pause for a second. what exactly is the human body's soil? I mean, we don't have literal dirt inside of us, right? If we're going to fix the soil, we have to know exactly what we're looking for. So the crucial point here is the 95% rule. 95% of the cells in the human body rely entirely on blood plasma as their environment. The other 5% rely on interstitial fluid, which is actually just a direct derivative of blood plasma. What does this mean? It means 100% of your cellular health is dictated by this fluid microenvironment. If your blood plasma is degraded, loaded with heavy metals, inflamed, or toxic, it is biologically impossible to achieve systemic repair. It doesn't matter how many fresh stem cells you pump in. Dr. Pan describes this using a metaphor that is pretty devastating, but incredibly accurate: the Chernobyl effect. Imagine taking a perfectly healthy, genetically flawless seed and planting it right in the middle of the irradiated, toxic earth around Chernobyl. What's going to happen? It dies immediately. The exact same thing happens when you inject localized stem cells into an arthritic knee or, say, a stroke-damaged brain, where the surrounding fluid environment is highly toxic. It is biologically futile to plant a pristine seed in irradiated earth. Okay, but is there actual proof that cleaning this soil works? Let's transition from theory to fact. Section 4, historical proof of reversing aging. Believe it or not, the scientific community has actually known this for decades. There are these super famous mouse studies ranging from Cornell in 1957 all the way to Stanford in 2005. Scientists performed something called heterochronic parabiosis. Basically, they surgically connected the circulatory systems of an old mouse and a young mouse. And the results? Wild. After just 5 weeks of the older mouse sharing that youthful, pristine plasma environment, its internal organs vastly rejuvenated, the biological clock of the liver reversed by 78%, and brain and neural aging reversed by 28%. The cells fixed themselves once the environment was clean. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it translates to humans naturally. During gestation, an older mother is essentially sharing a circulatory environment with this incredibly youthful fetus. It's a state of natural temporary parabiosis. And population data actually shows a staggering longevity benefit for mothers who experience this plasma rejuvenation later in life. Get this, a mother having her last child at age 45 has a 50% higher probability of reaching age 80 than a mother who had her last child at 35.
Dr. Pan really stresses that this concept goes back over a century. Think about 1912. Nobel laureate Dr. Alexis Carrel kept avian heart tissue alive in a petri dish for decades. How? Simply by constantly refreshing the fluid it lived in. He never replaced the cells themselves. So across species, across in vitro studies, and in natural human pregnancy data, this biological constant remains absolutely true. You cannot reverse biological aging by adding cells. You have to rejuvenate the fluid environment.
So we've diagnosed the problem, and the science definitely holds up. Let's look at the real-world solution. Section 5, purifying the human microenvironment. Obviously, we can't physically connect humans to achieve parabiosis. That's straight out of a sci-fi movie. So the mandate for modern medical science is to engineer the clinical equivalent. The real future of longevity lies in advanced therapeutic plasma exchange and purification. The idea is to systematically extract a patient's blood, filter and purify the plasma of all its inflammatory markers, toxins, and degraded proteins, return it to a youthful state, and then recirculate it. We really have to move away from the needle and the syringe as our primary weapons against aging. True regenerative medicine has to begin with the biological blueprint. By shifting our entire focus from the stem cell to the blood plasma, we're no longer just treating the symptoms of an aging body. We are fundamentally changing the environment where life thrives. And that allows our own existing stem cells to just wake up and start repairing the damage naturally. To quickly sum up the ultimate takeaways from Dr. Pan's explainer, aging is a disease of the environment, not the cell. If you clean the environment, aging can be controlled. And guys, this isn't some distant future pipe dream. Dr. Pan points out that this technology exists right now. There are specialized GMP-certified facilities, like one currently operating in Jakarta, that are offering advanced plasma purification services today. The era of the soil has officially arrived. We've spent so much time worrying about the seeds, we completely forgot to tend the garden. By understanding that your blood plasma dictates the health of literally every cell in your body, you can start taking back control of that biological clock. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If aging is just an environmental disease, and your chronological ID card doesn't dictate your physical reality, how will you treat your inner soil today? Thanks for joining me on this Explainer Focused Learners. Keep asking the right questions, and I'll catch you next time.